So I'd like to introduce Alvin Huff. And he became interested in art very early on in his life, and did a lot of ceramic work, but then took a hiatus from object making for 20 years. However, in the interim, he received his degree in philosophy from Brown University. He worked for Americar Vista in Washington, D.C., and has traveled all over the world internationally as a Peace Corps volunteer. And then in 2010, he resumed his studies at Arizona State University, where he is now in the MFA program in sculpture. He uses very interesting, both intuitive, process-based work, coupled with digital CNC milling. He uses organic material as a base for his models, and in his current work, he hopes to impart a sense of intent reflected in the chaotic element that organic materials bring to casting, but leaves you, the viewer, to draw your own conclusions regarding the meaning. But I know he'll talk about some of the meanings as well. So, Alvin?
Okay, thank you. So yeah, my first pour was a reaction mold. One of the things that got me caught into that was a gentleman named Eric Bogner. He was pouring brass into a wood box, and I thought that was just amazing, and I wanted to do that. So I talked to Mary and asked her if I could do that, and she said, sure, sign the waiver. And that was my first pour, which was at Scottsdale Community College with Ted Urin. But the thing that I liked about it when I saw the casting come out was just the pattern in it. It made sense, but I didn't know what it was about. And it's like something you want to know about, but you can't. There's not a writing on the wall, like when you look at a wood sculpture, and you look at the wood grain, the different, like the burrow of a wood grain, if you know very good wood. So incorporating wood into casting has basically been a process of trying to control or understand the chaotic processes, right? But it got me there because the pattern for me was very fractal-like. And I was very into that, coming into, I was into computers, and so computer-generated fractals, just being able to punch in some numbers, and suddenly I have this beautiful object in front of me, or a beautiful picture in front of me. And it also translated into, what I saw in the world from just traveling in the Philippines, and learning how to scuba dive and looking at coral, whether it's the moving sea anemone or brain coral, or looking down the wall of a coral wall and it just disappearing in the distance, but there's a sense of organization about it, but I don't quite get it all. So whether this was generated in Chaos Crow, if you're interested in playing with fractals. And this is just a basic example of the fractals that just catch my mind, those patterns that just are created in the nature. And I just wanted to bring that with the wood casting, primarily wood. And I've worked with other fabrics and stuff like that, but wood is the one that catches my interest. And from that, the main things that I think are important to me are the texture of the wood, depending on whether it's a hardwood or it's pine, the rhythm between the hard and the soft, as well as using wood is included in a casting. And then not so much, but I still try to experiment with that, is the chaotic degassing that comes from, the metal hits the wood and then whatever, the moisture, oils, degas, and you have random bubbles. So in choosing the wood, I try to find, it's just go to a log, and I let it dry as far as the process of getting it ready and before I even begin to carve it. I let it season, if you will. Typically 4 to 6 months in Arizona, that just means a summer, right? Because it's 100 degrees for several months. And I include in that, as far as when I look at the wood, I'm not just looking at the pattern, but the checking as well. I think that's very interesting, the way it naturally cracks. And so in order to bring out more of that pattern, one of the things that I've found through casting is that charring the wood, developing the pattern by burning away, the softer layers will burn away, the harder layers will stay. And then casting it, the pattern becomes deeper. So the more you do, the deeper the pattern, the less it is, the less of the pattern. You can also almost create a gradient if you're careful with your torch. So this is my first reaction mold. This is my first mold, period. And looking at it's right there, dead center. If you can. That's it. That's my baby. Yeah, I've realized that in my ignorance in casting, suddenly I felt a certain bit of, as we're coming toward the end of the pour, everybody kept asking me if I was going to pour it, and I said, sure, why not? I mean, unless somebody else wants to pour. I was charging. Since it was my first pour, that's what you do, right? But I sensed a sense of nervousness about pouring this mold, when it's a reaction mold, and it's my first. So I said, sure. And then suddenly there was a whole bunch of people. They're like, yeah, I'll pour that with you. And then when I poured it, it was just like, yeah, I never really talked dirty to my art, but that was the first time that I learned, like, yeah, okay, anyway. And so it sputtered a little bit, and I realized that this is when I realized I needed to take the class. But I like the experience. I mean, if you like a little bit of adrenaline and pouring the wood, it'll get you there. In this situation, my vents were too small, and the sputtering just basically blocked it up. But I learned to work with it, and this was the piece that came out of it. So it's a little bit of it's a combination of, this is called inscribed epitome. And that little ring down there is a little bit of neon. I was learning neon at the time as well. But for a first experiment, yeah, I was hooked. I was ready to go. So I moved on from that, and I looked for other inspirations, as far as my travels. And I drew a lot of my travels as far as like where I should go with this process and what I wanted to make. And since I had just spent 2 previous years in the Gambia, West Africa, and met a lot of artisans who were making masks, mostly around the tourist industry, but that was a traditional thing for them, or carving out pounders. If you ever know what those, the bowls with the large sticks, the ladies, they make breakfast in the morning. Whenever you hear that term, the natives are restless, and you hear this like thumping in the distance. Dun, 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 dun. They're not restless, they're making breakfast. So my attempt was to make a mask, and this was the first attempt. It wasn't so successful. There's a lot of learning going on, trial and error. We poured this with a ring gate, with the wood, and this is the wood right here. The carpeting, I don't know if you can see that. And this was the first attempt. Or this is actually the second attempt. This, what you see down here at the bottom, is the first attempt. And basically the wood got floated in the mold, and the brass just came around underneath. So the second attempt, and this is where I learned that it comes out better if you pre-char it, because it was already charred. It was cracked, and I was like, you know what? I spent 2 months, might as well pour it in again, nothing can be lost. But instead of a full jacket, it was just a sand cap, put on top, a hanging core, basically. And if you look right here, you'll see we pour directly into it, starting at the head and let it flowing down to the chin. And then to be able to remove it, once you pour it into it, it just holds on to it. And then I found if I try to force it, it's going to break. So it's a slow process of just letting the wood burn out. I use forced air, galvanized pipe with a hairdryer on the end of it, a little to expedite it. One gentleman you may run into him, his name's Andrew Marsh. And I found that it's a lot easier to do it his way at an iron pour, where you simply take, when they drop the bottom, you take the coals, take the coke and you put it on the piece and let it burn away the wood. And that just works all night. So if you have any questions, yeah, let me know. Raise your hand or just blurt it out. This is basically a miscast, but I like it. And it's one of the reasons I just kept going with it. I just like the texture of it and the randomness of it. I still have this, it's around somewhere, probably in the studio. I haven't figured out what to do with it. I think I might bring it back together with neon somehow. This is a close up. This is what I was trying to get out of it. It wasn't complete, you know. It was one of those, it wasn't quite what I had idealized in my mind. And then the wood just has this way of creating like a Gaussian blur on whatever you create. And I carved this piece in basically the negative into a flat piece of a log cut in half, and then I carved the face into it, which was an experiment in itself. But I wish I had a close up of that. This is and that was in brass, and this is the cleaned up piece. With a little bit of liver sulfur. So I tried to, take it, make a series out of it. So I went to silicone molding, and that worked pretty well. This is it when it popped out. And here's the first whack. I basically slush cast the initial part in to get in all the detail, and then I brushed it up to get the right thickness. And this is the piece that came out of it. This is this was at I did this one at ASU. I believe. Yeah, we did a copper matrix. So basically you're looking at copper and iron on the left, and then I patinaed it on the right, a little cupric. And I showed this down at the Western Cast Iron Conference in 2012. And this is another wax that was done in bronze. So again, when in this part, I'm just looking for the texture part. I'm looking for the pattern. I think in broad brushstrokes. I learned from that. Any kind of detail that you put into it, once you charge, it's just going to be lost. Head pressure to push the metal into the detail is important. And that if a piece of wood is actually checked, that's not a bad thing. You don't know what's going on in it, but that's part of the experiment. And the more that you char it, just getting to the point where it just has a light layer of ash, it will give you a lot of detail, right? But still, it wasn't at that point, I wanted to have a little bit more control over the whole process. So one of the things I'll show you later is purging the cavity with a little bit of argon gas or inert gas in order to flush out the oxygen. So some of the sources of what I've played with, mostly just natural log, but I've also tried composites like plywood, right? To get the pattern, mostly it's the linear is going to move along, going with the grain, or the radial is just doing the end cut. If you have a large log, just slicing it with a bandsaw. If you want to have that ring pattern. But knots are great because then it has the linear and then it has the radial. Just pops up into it. So this is good. This is my attempt at a basic relief. And the goal with this was not necessarily create a piece in and of itself, was to create an element that I could add to a larger piece. So think of like an obelisk that has like a glyph in it, and this would be set in it. A series of these would be set in it. But again, the issue was controlling the whole process, or exercising, being able to know what I'm going to get out of it from beginning to end. And in carving this, I basically took my notes from the wood itself. I looked at the grain. On the left, I worked with the knot that was in it. I thought of a more a celestial take, right? Like the gases from an asteroid or the rings of like Saturn, and then going on to the next step. And then I charted. This took about roughly an hour and a half. I let it sit. You chart and then you listen to it. It cracks, it's warm, you wait, you chart again, and do it in a series, right? And on the left you see there's a little bit, it's still burning because the knots really have a lot of oil in them. So I'm bringing this together, and I want it to be thin, and I want it to be like part of a facade, right? This was the mold that I basically came up with, and this is basically the first picture you saw of the flame coming out. That's this. I don't recommend doing this. This is one of those things that was an experiment that didn't, probably wasn't the safest way to do it. And these were a couple of the pieces that came out. At the bottom, you're going to see, that's the copper matrix again. And in the background there is just iron. But again, as you can see from this, the one at the bottom, oops, is basically the pattern you see on the left, right? And the issue, again, was how do you keep the metal inside the mold, right? But this is the piece that came out of it. Dogon is a region in Mali, which is near the place where I served when I was in the Gambia. So it's highly textured, and I even like the colors, but still I wanted to experiment for a little bit more accuracy as far as filling the whole pattern. So I moved on to trying to control the space using filling it from the bottom up. So this piece right here is using composite wood, just plywood, and then natural wood on the sides to make a sort of an eye shape, an eye symbol. And in the middle is ceiling top. And I built this at Fort Hays, Kansas in 2012. When this went off, it went off like a jet engine. The idea was that instead of with the box mold pouring into the top and have the gases escape in the same direction, if you pour it in from the bottom and then let it fill up, right, the gases have a way to escape without interfering with the metal entering the mold, right? And this is the mold itself. So basically on the two pieces on the top are basically a sand jacket, but also is the venting and the gating for the mold. Near the bottom is where it's going to flow in, and there's like a 16-degree tilt. And this is the piece that came out of it. And this is less about the texture and more about the degassing, right? There's a lot of voids and bubbles in there, and it's fairly thin. I haven't taken this piece to completion yet, but I still have it. So in this next piece, I wanted towards making a vessel and coming back to the texture. But again, the whole process of how do I get the metal in there and keep it in there and still get the pattern was the question. So I basically decided to pour directly through the hanging core. So I drilled down through the center and then in through the sides, and so they met. So it basically, the metal would go in halfway, right, and hit the bottom. And then from there, it can still vent through the sides. And here's this piece again, burning it out slowly with the hairdryer at the bottom. And this is the piece that came out of that. And Ogun, which I found very interesting since at the ritual yesterday, Oguns, as they were saying, is fire here, but Ogun there is the god of iron and war. But it's spelled the same, which I was trippy. I have to research that. So in this piece, basically the bottom part right there is actually the mold piece. That is this piece right here in the center. And so I use that as part of the piece, and it spoke Dao means boat. So West African, it's the iron god's boat, and it spoke to me that way. And being somebody who had lived in the Gambia and sitting on the beach, this is where the fishermen would come in with their daily catch, right? But again, you know, it's a great ride. But in order to have I wanted to go the opposite direction from having the highly textured, you know, piece to actually including the wood and being able to control the interaction between the molten metal and wood itself. So I tried something that's, we call it reductive casting. And basically I carve the wood first with the idea that I have the metal flow into it and just hold it. Right? And to do that, and one of the people that gave me, that was one of my inspirations for that, was Hila Shemiya, who's a designer from Israel, who casts aluminum into large logs, but she made furniture. So this is not going to be quite as useful, but is along that vein. So basically I carved the piece, sanded it down to about 600 grit. I had a general idea of how I wanted the wood. I picked, if you look in the top upper piece of the wood here, that's a knot, right? And so my plan was to have it flow in there and then in through the holes. So here's the piece with the wood removed, and this is the drag. Right? I add a lot of venting just in case there's for shrinkage. Here's the cope where the metal's going to flow in, and then my vents here. And so when I poured this at ASU, a lot of people were excited to pour it because they like doing reaction molds. But because I used argon gas, I purged it for about 30 minutes beforehand, and then just before the pour, right? And it poured basically like a normal pour. No flash, no flare, no fun. And this is the piece when I basically got it apart. There's still some burning, but I expected that. And there's still going to be the vaporizing of the oils. So there's still going to be degassing, but there's not going to be any flame. And so one of the things that I learned from this is the wood still going to have its say, right? If you're going to work with wood, it's like working with the bones of a being. The texture itself is basically, it's three-dimensional, but it's also a fourth dimension because it's a measurement of its life. The rhythm is a measurement of its life. So it's like taking a thumbprint or, sculpting with time. It's like an organic data set that you're printing onto iron or bronze or whatever, And so in this situation, when you think, I'm not really going for the texture, I'm just going for the wood, there still is the oils, and it's gonna, these little bits right here, the burning, the charring, which I think is actually nice, also leads to having, it's gonna degas, and the bubble is gonna sit in the center, right? So you'll have a thin layer against the wood that may not be complete. Does that make sense? It's gonna create a void. Which you can see here. You can see here. Okay. So after cleaning that up a bit, I like some of the flashing that came off of it. And this is the finished piece. So from this, for me, I like the way that the knot worked out, right? For the smaller portions of where the metal connected to the wood piece, I would probably go for something a bit larger and let the wood do what it's going to do, which is vaporize the wood oils and turn it into a gas and create the void, but allow for that. So I've gone for the texture. I mean, I've played with the degassing and then the inclusion, right? Which I think I'll do another piece like this. And so to take it up a notch and exercise more control, which I mean, that's depending on how you feel about having control over a dynamic process. I mean, that's individual. I moved on to 3D modeling. And so some of my how should I say? A lot of my travels was all about, you know, learning other people's cultures and visiting and experiencing their rituals and their temples, just like the gentleman before he was in India and I was in Southeast Asia, and I visited a lot of prongs and temples throughout Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and I ran into, you know, a lot of symbols that seem to repeat themselves from land to land. Like prongs look almost, the only difference between what I see between a prong and one of the, what was the name of the spires in the temple for Southeast Asia? Or for South India? One is square.
The stupas, or the,
Stupas is what they call it in Southeast Asia, but I guess maybe they call it stupa as well in India.
and it was a word similar to stupa, but a little bit longer, I can't remember.
Well, anyway, the style of temple, and the difference is one is square and one is slightly round. I also found, and just seeing these different icons that poke up from, you know, culture to culture and the similarities, but they have their own take on it, right? And so I thought to myself, this is basically based off Paisley, you know, and I find myself naturally, I draw that symbol. Like I have sketchbooks where it's just, you know, they're just tied together and they're very organic. And so I just started researching this thing, where does Paisley come from? And then the whole, the trade with Ireland through India, and then it comes back through the Fertile Crescent to Iran, and then I looked in a pre-Muslim art, and I see the symbol, right, on the side of a piece of ceramics, and it looks just like a Paisley, except it's from the 4th century. So I'm like, it's traveled through time, and it meant so many different things for different people, and I guess this is separate from the whole, the organic thing you bring it to is just a process that I'm applying to the things that inspire me. So this is this is basically based on Paisley, which I modeled in Rhino, and then I milled using a blurry custom, it's called an Iron Horse, and this is laminated XPS. And this is just the rough cut. This is the finishing cut. And here it is, I'm using the, basically using the pattern to define how I'll place it into the wood. And the good thing about using the Rhino 3D is I scaled it to the wood. I didn't have to really design for the wood. I just found it, picked it, and then I could adjust my, whatever I designed to fit it, right? And here's the pattern and the wood paired together. I also, I mean, if you try this, cutting down the wood, which I did with a planer, will save you on some sand. And then here's the charring. This took me about 3.5, 4 hours. And this is charring one side, stopping, charring the other side, and yeah. And then here is the pattern with the wood included in a sand mold. And then the hanging core, my little hinky work situation. And then here, okay, this was supposed to be a video.
Is the word hyperlinked the making?
No, it's supposed to have a little place symbol. No, anyway. here's the piece that came out of it. And I call this Crescent Butte. And this and Paisley, before it was Paisley, this was there's so many variations on the name for it. This is one of them. Botteh. Or Botteh, or okay. Do you have any questions?
Did you on the Crescent Butte, did you purge that with argon?
No, I did not. Like doing the combination of purging and trying to get the texture, not the inclusion, I haven't tried that yet.
Could you explain a little bit the purging with the argon, with the processes?
So in the
Do you just have the movie on your desktop? That's my other question.
do it. That's a good question. So basically, I mean, with the bonded sand. So basically the idea is, it's gonna blow up, right? So the thing that you wanna do is remove something in the triangle. You're not gonna get rid of the heat, right? You're not gonna get rid of the fuel, the wood's just gonna be there, so you take away the oxygen. So when you purge it with argon, which is inert, the oxygen, and it's heavier, right? It's expensive, but it's heavier than oxygen, it's gonna push it up and out. But also, it's gonna, if you do it beforehand, because there's porosity in the bonded sand, it's gonna push the oxygen away from the piece through the sand. So you purge it like 20 minutes, 30 minutes beforehand, and then just before, right? So when you pour in the metal, and you may even wanna, have a little bit right there at the pour spout, so that no air is actually entrained into the piece. I didn't have that issue. But if you have easy access to argon, you could try that.
Just unhook it from your tape welder.
Yeah.
So did you do that for all of your reaction molds or just?
Just the inclusion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it might be one of those things where I'll get. Yeah. So the thing with that is that you're still gonna have the vapor. You're still gonna have the wood oil, right? It's still gonna be in there.
Mm-hmm.
So with this piece, right? I think I got great texture with it, without any of that. But this is basically being poured upside down, where the wood is on the bottom. So once it basically fills with metal, there's no oxygen anymore, right?
So that's hollow?
It's hollow. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Ah, I know it. And this is basically the making of that piece. This is the mold. This is done at SCC, Scottsdale Community College in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's a double pour. Is this you?
I think so.
You look like fairy dust. No, that didn't really sputter that bad, but one of the things you can do is if you think of like a drain and you put in like a trap so that the metal doesn't have a direct route out. It's gonna hit something, it's gonna hook, and the finer stuff will flow through, but it's not gonna sputter something that's gonna burn somebody. And so just to look into the future, this is going to be the next piece. And this is basically my impression of like an ankh, but more a new agey ankh, and a keyhole. This foam is already milled out, but it's a little bit too thick for the wood for the machine we have at ASU. So I'm going to have to go to a different place and get and the wood's going to be right here. And if I can find the right one, it's basically going to have all of that texture here. And if I can find a check, it's going to come up this way and that way. Like really hard checked old piece of log with a knot in it would be ideal. And that's just taking in from the other part was just the foam was milled, but now I'm going to mill both parts. And so it should fit together nicely.
You're gonna mill the wood?
A tech shop in Chandler.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked to them already. They said it was good to go. And it's big. Their bot is big enough to do that. It's deep enough. The Z-axis is deep enough to do that. And I have a bit and everything. Anyway, questions?